This is The Gala Show. I'm your reporter on the beat, Gala Avery. On this episode, you may know my guest as a jack of all trades. He's the writer, producer, director, and composer of titles such as Necropolis, Legion, Queen of Blood, and Parasite Lady. Maybe you know him as the author of Corman/Poe, a collection of conversations with Roger Corman that explore the making of Corman's Edgar Allan Poe films. Or even you might know him as the man that helps run the circus that is Full Moon Features. Well, here on The Gala Show, I know him as the black glove killer with a very cool hat who loves the Video Archives podcast.
I do. I'm having a moment right now.
Chris Alexander.
Thank you. I can't even live up to that introduction. But I'm having this great moment right now because you're in front of this microphone, in front of me, looking at me, looking down. But your beat. Your diatribe, the things you're saying, are what I listen to, and I'm actually watching it happen in real time. I'm having this out-of-body surreal experience. I'm in
your head. I'm in your walls.
Yeah. So now I'm seeing like life imitating art, I don't know. It's all palindromic. So yes.
Well,
thanks for having me on.
You're very welcome. If you didn't catch that, this is Chris Alexander here on The Gala Show.
Yes, I'm a bit loquacious. I talk a lot. So
it's okay. Well, we're good.
Reel me in.
Well, before we begin the topic for today, I have a question for you.
Sure.
So I actually did not know before today, not before this room, but before today, that you were the former editor-in-chief of Fangoria.
Yeah. I was the third editor in history to run that. I ran it for 6 years.
That was crazy. Yeah. And then I knew that you were a father, but I didn't know that you were raising your 3 sons while editing Fangoria.
Absolutely.
How did you juggle that?
Well, I mean, I guess at the tail end of it, I'm a single father. I wasn't at the time. So, I mean, it was phasing out. But, I decided when I got the gig, they said, come move to New York. I live in Toronto, Canada. Mm-hmm. I'm Canadian. Like you are, kind of.
Yeah, no, my dad's born Flin Flon, and so I have the essence of Canada. It's funny, my brother's also Canadian, but he's never been.
Oh, okay. Well, you should come on up, man. I got a whole house full of pinball machines and amazing stuff. We'll come over. Anyways, I was in with all these children, and they said, come to New York. I said, I don't want to come to New York. I want to stay here, free healthcare and all this fun stuff. And I could, as long as I get a Wi-Fi signal, I can run this thing from Mars. So I stayed in Toronto, and I ran Fangoria the entire time from my home office, only going to New York when I needed to, traveling when I needed. And I proved that I could, and I did. And not only ran Fangoria, but I brought back Gorezone. I locked the deal with the band Kiss to do the official Kiss magazine, all running out of Fangoria. So I did like 200 magazines during that run. It was crazy. From Toronto. Yeah, with my kids, like literally rocking them. Barbara Steele would call the house darling. My kids would pick up the phone, Dad, it's Barbara. And then Nicolas Cage would call the house, how's your dad home? And he's like, Dad, it's some guy named Nick. And that was my life. I'll never forget Mila Jovovich on the phone to her doing this interview. I guess it was Resident Evil part whatever. And she's got her kid in her arm. I got my kid in my arm. We're trying to conduct this interview. And eventually I had to call it. I'm like, Mila, I can't do this anymore. I can't. She's like, the interview has never, ever aborted an interview with me before. This is a first. But that was my life. I did it well, but then in retrospect, did I? I don't know. It was all this wild blur. But you know what? I think I did the right thing because my kids have had a front row seat to this madness their entire life. Like they have done things that most kids of their vintage would never.
And do they hope to join the circus?
My oldest definitely. He's super into Roger Corman's his idol. He's a voracious reader, a cinema geek. He listens 16. To your podcast.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, no, he's the guy. He loves heavy metal and rock and roll, and he's the guy. They're all into it to some degree, but when sometimes it's like what Dad does. It's just what Dad does. They live in this crazy house. I mean, that's just life to them, right?
Well, that was like me with Pulp Fiction, honestly.
Right.
Pulp Fiction was just always like this thing that my dad just did.
Sure.
And everyone around me was like, it's this huge thing. And I was like, well, I didn't see it until I was 18.
Right. Oh, really?
Yeah,
you didn't see it until you were 18?
Dad held off. He was like...
Now, was it your dad or was it your mom pulling
It was
the
my
reins?
dad.
Oh, yeah.
My dad is very... Like, for example, like Mr. Stitch, which he hates showing anyone.
Right.
We started playing it. He actually turned it off. Oh. And I didn't see Killing Zoe until I was maybe like... God, we were making Lucky Day when I saw Killing Zoe.
What?
And Rules of Attraction for the first time. I was 15 for Rules of Attraction.
Okay, but you're a human being in this era that has your fingers long.
Access.
You have access to everything. What did you really just?
I have respect for my father's wishes.
Wow, that is your dad.
My dad told me not to do it.
Your parents did a good job then. That's fantastic. Wow.
But took that long.
My kids have no respect for me. No, that's not true at all. They have absolute respect for me. I hope.
But they also have respect for art, so maybe
they do have respect for it. But also, I've been pretty when they were really little, and I'd show them Raiders of the Lost Ark, and the heads would explode. I'd always explain to them what this is. I'd show them the making of stuff so they could see the wax heads and everything else. So I would always show them the wizard behind the curtain, so that they were always. I was hoping that they'd always be clear. What is real, what is fantasy, what is illusion. And I would never show them anything that had any kind of sexual violence or anything like that that was above them. But certainly, I mean, to me it was always ridiculous. On Halloween, you throw blood and guts on your kid and skeletons, and you're freaking the hell out of everybody. And then suddenly on November 1st, it's all over. Now we can't show our kids this stuff because it's going to turn them into serial killers. It's like, what? I was always at odds with that. So to me, it's always like, if they're interested in this stuff, I'm going to take them into, behind the curtain and show them what's what.
I think that's great.
Yeah. So normalize it,
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as always, my guest gets to bring their topic to the microphone. Chris, why don't you tell us what your topic is and why you decided to choose it?
This is so hard for me because both of us love movies so much.
And we had literally 6 topics in the email.
I don't drink really. I don't never done drugs. I've just been a slave to cinema. I mean, it is true, and especially stranger cinema, dark and horror stuff. So I could talk about anything, but I did mention to you, because I know your dad. He's a big fan of Dawn of the Dead.
Yes, he really is.
Yeah.
He loves that whole entire trilogy, but specifically...
Trilogy? It's funny you say that.
Well,
Okay, you stop it at Day of the Dead then?
I mean, I think we're going to put 30 minutes on the clock, and I think we're going to start talking about Dawn of the Dead and my trilogy.
No, that's fair enough. That's the Rubenstein-Laurel trilogy of Dawn of the Dead, yeah. And now it's time for a commercial break. And we're back.
Okay.
Or the Living Dead movies.
I mean, I would consider it a trilogy partially because my dad just showed me the first 3 and then that was it. And so maybe it's because I don't know if my dad would say it was a trilogy though, because I think he would also doesn't Dan O'Bannon have a movie that kind of
he has Return of the Living Dead, which has nothing to do with the series. It started off as based on a book by John Russo, who had co-wrote Night of the Living Dead. Mm-hmm. But if you read the book Night of the Living Dead, it's not the movie. Yeah. It was originally supposed to be directed by Tobe Hooper in 3D, and it went through a lot of hands, and it actually opened up against Romero's Day of the Dead. And that's why Day of the Dead bombed, is that everybody a lot of people got confused.
Wow.
Plus, Return of the Living Dead, if you've seen it, it's like a punk rock.
I actually haven't seen it.
Oh my God. Let's stop recording right now and watch it. It's a masterpiece. It's amazing. It's like Jaws. It's a perfect movie. You get sucked in every time. There's not a false moment in that picture. It's just maniacal.
Wow, you use the term perfect movie. Yeah. How many other movies would you attribute that word to?
It's perfect. It's so subjective, obviously.
I agree.
But movies that you can keep, sometimes they're imperfect, but they have a certain kind of, it's almost like putting on a song that you love, and you can listen to, Pink Floyd's Comfortably Numb or Stairway to Heaven over and over ad nauseum, because it just hits the right notes. It follows the pathways in your brain where it's perfect. Jaws is one of them. I mean, I watched Jaws a billion times, and I always forget that Quint is going to die. You know what I mean? Because you're so sucked up in the narrative, and as in so many movies. I mean, of course I'm drawing a blank, but there are so many perfect quote unquote movies where you get sucked into the drama. Yeah. And Return of the Living Dead is like that.
I mean, I like the idea though that it's something that you can do ad nauseum, because you can just watch it over and over and over and find something about yourself that's different each and every time that you watch it. I mean, for me, Bugsy Malone is definitely, it's like my favorite movie of all time.
Paul Williams. I know we're both Paul Williams freaks. But
yeah, we are. But that's my favorite movie of all time, and so much so that I listen to it in the car on my Spotify. I have a playlist. Yeah. Exactly. And I have the record, and I'll sit in the dark with my fireplace on, and I'll just listen to the record. I started crying the other night listening to it.
When I was really little, my grandmother had the paperback of Bugsy Malone,
really?
Which had that insert in the middle that had like 4 or 5 pages of black and white photographs. So I couldn't read the book, but I could look at the photos, and I was so fucking confused. Because I thought it was gangsters, but they're throwing pies at each other. Like, what is happening? And they're children. But I was obsessed with looking at those photos. Yeah. I didn't see Bugsy Malone until many years ago.
Yeah, the Japanese vinyl has this fantastic story from Paul Williams, basically. I think it's from Alan Parker about Paul Williams. Yeah. But just about how they came together and how they made it. And how Bugsy Malone, he's torn between Ireland and Italy.
Right.
And so he's like the child of both. And that's why he doesn't fit in anywhere.
Yeah.
So he's kind of being pulled I just love it.
Alan Parker, another perfect movie. Angel Heart. Have you ever seen that with
No,
Mickey Rourke and Robert
I need
De
to
Niro?
see. Like that's the thing. It's like I love Alan Parker so much with Bugsy
Yeah,
Malone. I'm
me
almost
too.
afraid to watch like Pink Floyd The Wall.
Well, Floyd the Wall. You know, if you're going to watch Pink Floyd the Wall, double it with Evita.
Okay.
Because that's him and his music. And actually, people like, Evita sucks. It does not suck. It's a masterpiece. But it's basically Pink Floyd the Wall. Just grafted on with Andrew Lloyd Webber. I mean, it's the same style. He's got the same style. If you watch if you watch Angela's Ashes, anything, there's a certain Parker. He's passed recently, didn't he? He's no longer with us. I think he did.
Did he?
I always get him and Neil Jordan crossed because they're both of that British directors.
To be honest, I don't know.
He did. I'm pretty sure he did.
Oh,
but
God.
Yeah, I know it sucks. But anyways, long story short, Angel Heart. You must watch this film, but watch it late at night and watch it alone. No distractions.
Yeah, that's so funny because there's certain movies that like you have to watch alone. Like when I saw Winter Kills,
right?
I watched it the first time by myself, and then I watched it the second time with my dad because I did it for the Pure Cinema podcast calendar episode. And then I went to the Bev to go watch it with the crowd, and I was like, "Why did I do this?" I love watching movies with crowds, but that movie was so much better just by myself.
You know, and I fell in love with this stuff, and Dawn of the Dead's one of them. I guess we better circle back on that. But are you watching these movies when you're at a certain age and you're impressionable,
the right time.
and you don't know a lot about the world really, and you're just loving these images that are so diametrically opposed to the natural world that you're used to, and you see them late at night. Like when I was little, before VHS even, I would get the TV guide in, and I would circle anything that was horror or anything that sounded cool and weird, and I'd sleep with an alarm clock under my pillow. And it would wake me up at those times, and I would crawl downstairs in the night.
Without your parents knowing.
Yes, so I'd be very quiet, so there was that kind of weird physical, visceral experience of not, it was like I was pulling the Lufthansa heist or something. And I got down there and sat in front of the TV, and I'd turn on the movie, and I'd watch these incredible films. And then if I heard one little creak, I'd turn it off.
And run away.
No, I wouldn't run away. I'd sit there in the dark, and I was like terrified. And then when the coast was clear, I turned it back on, and some like crazy fucking thing was on screen, and it made the whole experience so immersive and interactive. And then the next morning would come, you'd be a bit sleep deprived, and you started to question whether or not you even watched that movie.
It's funny, I have one of those because my dad, as an Academy member, used to get the screeners, and then he would watch them like after my mom had gone to bed and after we kids had gone to bed. And I remember going out there once, I couldn't sleep, and he was watching Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind.
Yeah.
And I have one of those weird moments where it's like, is it a dream that I'm kind of watching this?
Right.
And I've never seen the movie since. I don't think I need to see the movie
great.
since.
No, it's a great
because
movie.
I have like that childhood, like dreamlike state where I wandered into it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
but what'll happen is that you'll watch it and it'll have this uncanny reaction to it where you will be transported back to being that child again.
Oh,
that's the power of those kinds of that's why I love so-called bad movies, because it's again late at night. There was a Buffalo station that we'd get with our rabbit ears in Toronto called WGRZ. It was an NBC affiliate, and they had something called the Cat's Pajamas, and they'd run horror movies after 11:30 news. It wasn't paid programming. It wasn't snow. It was movies and Twilight Zone. I got Twilight Zone tattoo because of all that. Twilight Zone reruns, Death Valley days, and weird horror movies like Death, Curse of Tartu, Blackula, David Cronenberg's that came from within.
Yeah.
And so you were seeing shit that you couldn't see anywhere. And even in the dawn of VHS in Toronto, I couldn't find any of this stuff.
How old were you, you think?
Oh, I got like 11.
Oh, yeah, okay, then you're going to have an even harder time.
Well, totally. But, I mean, we didn't have Blockbuster Video or anything like that. We had mom and pop stores. So Dawn of the Dead was one of the big ones for me because I would always see it in the video store. Eventually when we did get a VCR when I was 11, my dad and I every Friday night would rent movies. And I saw Dawn of the Dead for the first time. And I remembered when I was little, I had this cousin who I sadly just recently found out, I hadn't seen him in 30 years, found out he died.
Oh, wow.
Jamie lived in Windsor, just on the border of Detroit. And he kind of tuned me into Kiss, my favorite rock band. He kind of got me schooled in Kiss and Alice Cooper. And he was like a cool guy, right? He knew shit, right? He was like an oracle. But he loved horror movies. And he would tell me about this movie, Dawn of the Dead, that we couldn't see in Canada. It was not allowed to be screened here.
Really?
Well, it was unrated, right? So we had provincial rating systems that was draconian. And, so it was screened at the Toronto International Film Festival in 1979. Romero came up for that, and he brought a 16 millimeter print, which I now own, actually.
You own that exact
I own
print.
his print that he left here with Dario Argento in 79. And it was donated to the Brock University.
Print has.
I know. It's a little pink, but who gives a shit?
And
it's the full
pink.
cans cut. It's the full cut.
Wow.
Yeah. So, anyways, I digress. So I remember going to the video store, and I saw The Thorny in My Yeah, before it was HBO, it was through an EMI, right? And it had that cover of Dawn of the Dead with that green lettering, which like army stencil, and it had Roger's face, the triptych of his face, rising, boom, 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 right? And I was just like, oh my God, it's Dawn of the Dead. That's the one that Jamie was telling me he used to drive over to Detroit every weekend with his friends to watch Dawn of the fucking Dead. And he'd tell me the gore and the guts and I'm like, I gotta see this. But I was afraid to rent it. I was afraid. So finally, on my 12th...
What were you afraid of?
I was just afraid it was going to be too scary.
Yeah.
And I was into scary, but this thing had like this legacy that my...
Your cousin had told you about it.
Oh, he had built it up. He was like John Houseman at the beginning of John Carpenter's The Fog, sitting around there telling the ghost stories. He would really hype it up for me. So I had a sleepover with my buddy when I was 11, turning 12. And we rented Dawn. Finally, we sat in, whatever. And it changed my fucking life. Wow. To this day, that's a perfect movie. Dawn of the Dead is note for note perfect. It's the best horror movie I've ever seen. It's the best, existential character drama I've ever seen. It's the best war movie I've ever seen. It's the best action film. It's the best kind of bizarro American new wave movie I've ever seen. It's also the best social satire. I mean, It fires on every known cylinder. The soundtrack is punishing, Goblin soundtrack. Romero's amazing drop cue stuff from the Dwarf Library, like the gonk and all those weird little cues. I mean, everything about it is a kind of hits just every sweet spot to me.
It's funny because that's so I have like this very small film club that started during lockdown.
Right.
So a bunch of people that I knew could get online and watch movies together.
Right.
And Night of the Living Dead was our very first movie we screened because at the time I was doing public domain movies, so just like whatever was available on YouTube. But now every year for like our anniversary, we watch one of the Dead movies.
Okay.
So then we had Night of the Living Dead, then we did Dawn of the Dead, and then we did Day of the Dead, now we're going to go back and do the Dan O'Bannon one because we're
you have to do Return of the Living Dead, but that's the party. The Romero stuff is the thinking man's pinky up kind of horror movie.
Exactly.
Still delivers the gore and everything you need, but it's got more on its mind. Whereas Return of the Living Dead is like a greased bullet and a gun.
Yeah. Well,
and it's just this screaming punk rock soundtrack. There's weird sex. The zombies talk. The brains. They scream. I mean, it's a wild movie. But then it's kind of funny. It is definitely funny. But then it turns. Tell me when you watch it if you can find the moment when it turns from this kind of weird, goofy black comedy to a balls out horror movie. This nihilistic nightmare. Something happens.
Does it do tonally or is it like through
everything?
The visuals?
I think it's one of those cinematic happy accidents that everything just starts to. The story, the characters, some great actors there. Clu Gulager's in it.
Yeah.
Linnea Quigley, but it just starts to wind down into this fucking nightmare, and it becomes a really genuinely scary movie.
There's like one other movie that does that perfectly tonally for me, which is something wild.
Oh my God, Jonathan Demme.
Yeah, the Jonathan Demme.
Yeah, that's I don't even know what's going on in that movie. I've seen it a million times.
Like halfway through the movie, like there's that lighting change at the prom, and that's exactly like it. Halfway through, it goes dark, and it goes dark visually, it goes dark tonally, and I think that's like one of the greatest tricks in cinema history I've ever seen.
Yeah,
in my life.
You're right. It is at the prom when it starts to everything just starts to
like
ratchet.
Literally, the light goes off.
Ratchet.
And
yeah.
It's so. Oh my
and then
God.
It ends in absolute carnage. That is
so
when I was a little boy, I didn't like that movie so much because it was was confused by that tone. But
I think I watched that the day that Jonathan Demme died. I think it was just like on TV.
Yeah, I never met Jonathan Demme. That's a real bummer.
Yeah, I think I was like 15.
On TV, so censored.
And in France. So
wow, that's a hell of a way to watch because that is a very kind of
on
European
film. On a TV
film.
like this, I'm like making like a very small box right now, like that.
Was
big.
it censored?
I don't know.
Well, you wouldn't know. There's so much sex.
I wouldn't know. I mean, I've seen it since.
Okay.
But not in a while.
I was just before you got in here. Goodfellas was on AMC, and it was hilarious because it was the censored TV version. And it was like, what are they doing? There's like all the violence, they slow down sequences. They used to do that all the time when they would make TV prints.
Oh, it's so funny. The producer of Buster and Billy, his son, I met with him to talk about Buster and Billy with him.
Right.
And his son told me that he was the voice actor for Pacino, I think in Scarface.
Oh, for
the TV version to get out all the cuss words.
Best. No, Scarface has the best.
I think it was for Scarface. I know it was for one of the Pacino films, but I think it was Scarface.
Scarface has the best alternate TV dialogue dub of all time.
I think it's him. Yeah.
There's that sequence where he's sitting there on the beach with Manolo. What's his name? I forget that actor's name. And he's like, "This town's like a great big pussy waiting to be fucked." And your friend, they dub it out with this town's like a great big chicken waiting to be plucked. It's the best. I mean, if you really love, if you collect 16 millimeter too, you'll end up getting a lot of TV prints because that's where most of them are. And you'll get some of the best alternate dubs.
And that's the funny thing is I really love these alternate dubs because sometimes they make a movie better. It's like mishearing a song lyric.
Well, and the powers that be, as usual, as you know, you and I know, these draconian sensorial powers
especially in Canada.
Oh, well, I mean, we'll get to that, but they were so stupid because when you were little watching these movies, I remember The Exorcist was another one when I was really little and seeing it on CBS. And, your mother sucks cocks in hell. Well, I don't know, forget what she's like, your mother scrubs socks in hell or something stupid like that. And all that does is tune you into like, hold on. And then you're more aware of something they're trying to not to show you. It's like the old Bugs Bunny cartoons. Don't go looking behind this door. Yeah. He's not behind this door. And all you want to do is look behind the door.
I think The Exorcist is another perfect movie.
Yeah,
I would totally argue. Yeah. And that's a trilogy that I would... I love, well, because Exorcist 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah, 2
is so good.
It is. 2 is actually, in a weird way, is the one I keep going back. Well, I love the score.
Well,
that's the big one.
It's so funny to me because I love The Exorcist. I will tell people how much I love it, but it's my least favorite out of all three of them.
Well, it's because it's the most quote unquote normal. It's also the one that's been ripped off so much.
Oh, but it's so good.
But nobody defends The Exorcist 2.
I love The Exorcist 2. I think it's awesome. And then The Exorcist 3, I think it's like Blatty. It's just doing exactly what he would have done. And Brad Dourif's in it.
Well, what do you think? I remember I used to be, in my early days, I was a publicist at Warner Brothers Films in Canada. And I remember we opened up The Exorcist at the beginning. Have you seen it?
Mm-mm.
Yeah, so it was part 4. And it was Paul Schrader. He directed it.
Oh, interesting.
And Warner got it back, and they got this weird thinking man's movie. They're like, fuck no, we want chicks spewing crap. So they burned it down, and they hired Rennie Harlan to do, with the same cast, or most of the same, Stellan Skarsgård, and to reshoot it completely from ground up on the same sets, different movie, different script. So there's 2 versions of The Exorcist, the beginning. One's called The Exorcist, the beginning. One's Schrader's The Exorcist Dominion, that we released simultaneously. So there's 2 impressions of the same movie done by 2 different, obviously incredibly different visions. Rennie Harlan, Paul Schrader.
I wonder why I call it like a trilogy, because obviously the 4th movie does exist. But
well, the 4th is still the 4th.
But is it Exorcist 4 or is it like Exorcist?
It's Exorcist Dominion, Exorcist, what are the beginning?
Well, because like for example, Alien, I consider Alien a trilogy. I know that a 4th Alien, I think a 5th one exists, but I consider it a trilogy.
I would like to leave Alien. I hate Alien 3. Alien 4 is stupid. But the Xenomorphs, you know what? I could watch the Xenomorph do dishes and I'd be happy. My bar is low. I love that. It's my second favorite monster outside of Karloff's Frankenstein.
Oh, really? Karloff's Frankenstein's your favorite?
But the Xenomorph is to me is
number
everything.
2.
Oh, it's the Giger. It's the the weird sex look to it, and the shine and the ferocity. I mean, everything about that creature is right out of the Freudian id. But anyways, back to Dawn of the Dead. So when I was little, I finally rented this thing, and I never experienced the movie like it, and it bored me, it excited me, it disturbed me. And up to this point, even though I was aware that people die, when you're little, you don't really think of your own mortality unless you've been really confronted by something immediate, and I wasn't. So this was the movie that destroyed me. For an entire year, I had night terrors. I'd wake up in other rooms crying. Because I remember sitting at my cottage that summer, looking out on my grandmother was doing the dishes and talking to me, and I was looking out at the lake. And I was like thinking, oh my God, one day everybody in this beach area will be dead. Everybody I know will be dead. My mother and father, my grandmother will be dead. And who will be in this cottage? And I just had this crazy...
Who will be here?
Yeah, and so it was all because of Dawn of the Dead and the whole idea of this kind of apocalyptic mass death. Because, part of the power of Dawn of the Dead is you can run from death. You can board yourself up in this utopian civilization where you have everything at your fingertips and pretend that you're not going to die. Yeah. And then Romero cuts to the hordes of zombies clawing at the gates. Death will always find you. So it really disturbed me. Plus, I didn't understand biology, right? So at the end, when they rip apart those bikers and the big, they pull out his guts and they pull out all the intestines, I didn't know what those things were. Yeah. I did not know we had ropes inside of us. It made us work.
Oh, wow.
So I would walk around in a state of physical terror because I felt like
someone just pulled them out of you.
Yeah, I felt like this bag of blood that could be punctured at any moment.
And we kind of are.
We are. But that was the movie. That was the moment, the right time when you're at preteen. Yeah. When reality starts to creep in.
When you see a horror movie. I mean, I have my Prince of Darkness.
Oh my God, that was amazing. Great
my daddy and we used to play this game with my family of like, which movie are we going to watch tonight? And everyone takes one movie out of the pile, and it was between Uncle Buck and Prince of Darkness. And my little brother, I love you, Ever, but my little brother knew that I wanted to watch Uncle Buck, and took it out. And so we watched Prince of Darkness. Man,
How old were you?
I don't know. I'm gonna guess like anywhere from like 10 to 12.
Oh, 10
and
to
he's like 8.
Yeah.
So thanks, Ev.
Yeah.
But yeah, that movie scared me so bad. I had night terrors. Even now, when I hear ringing in my ears, I'm like, oh my God, I'm trying to contact myself.
Yeah.
Like,
Speaking of Alice Cooper, he's in that too, right? Yeah.
I think he is.
Yeah, he's one of the homeless guys. Prince of Darkness I saw a little bit later. I don't think it ever scared me.
The trailer came on at the Bev, and I like couldn't watch the trailer. I started getting. I've never seen the movie since. I'm too scared to watch it. I'm too scared.
Oh, this is awesome.
I can't watch. I'm
you
not
gotta do it. You can't.
The trailer came on, and my dad was with me. I think I was like clutching onto him and like hiding my eyes. It was so. I started feeling nauseous.
Yeah. You might not be as scared of it anymore. I mean, there's a lot of comedy in that too with the. What's his face from Big Trouble in Little China.
Well, when you watched, I'm assuming that you've seen Dawn of the Dead again.
Again?
Like a billion
I watch
times.
Dawn of the Dead like once a week. I'm not kidding.
But like when you saw it
there's,
the second
because there's
time,
various cuts of it, right? You know.
Yeah, there's various cuts.
Yeah.
But when you were a kid,
Yeah.
you saw it the one time, and then did it take you like a whole year to watch it again?
What I would do is I got another VCR secondhand, and I'd start dubbing movies, and I became like this pornographer. I would start to like dub movies, and I was the only guy. I had a briefcase full of, which is weird why I ended up taking over Fangoria. It was hard to find Fangoria in Toronto, and I'd find it. You'd find it up in the porn racks and stuff, and I'd find it. And I'd in the used bookstores, and I'd have a briefcase full of this stuff, and I'd be like opening it up on the school bus, going, "Hey, check it out, ladies! Look at this! Hey!" And I'd start dubbing movies, and Lucio Fulci's *The Gates of Hell* and *Pieces*, and one of them was *Dawn of the Dead*. And I would spread that like a virus to people, and I really turned people on to these movies. I created this whole little cabal, this little cult in Toronto of all these people I was their smut dealer. It was amazing. But so I watched Dawn of the Dead several times, but for a long time I was afraid of it. I was also afraid of Return of the Living Dead. I remember I told you I would circle the TV guide stuff. I remember watching Return of the Living Dead and being also freaked out by that. I saw that a little bit, actually almost the same time. I think it was like a year later. And I remember going to bed and seeing in the TV guide that Return of the Living Dead was on at 2 a.m. And I couldn't sleep just knowing that fucker was on the TV.
Really?
I wasn't watching it. I don't know who was watching it, but to know at that point in history and time that movie would be playing on that box downstairs, and if I just went down and turned it on, it would hit me.
See it. Wow.
So that whole concept of this happening, we don't have that anymore because everything's at our command.
That's the weirdest thing. It's like everything's at our command, and do TV guides even exist anymore?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know.
Well, I don't know if they do or not.
I don't even know if I have cable. I mean,
I definitely don't.
Full disclosure, at my apartment, I don't even have a TV besides my little CRT. I have like a little tiny, smaller than my laptop, and that's what I use to watch stuff.
But there was a pleasure to that because appointment television or whatever they call it. There was definitely, you had to be there to see this thing, and if you missed it, you were fucking done. I mean, that was it.
And you never got to see it again.
You had one shot. But yeah, man. So Dawn of the Dead was the one,
and you watch it every week now, basically.
Well, now it's like I'm obsessed. I mean, here's the thing about Dawn of the Dead is George you say there's only 3. I mean, those were produced by Richard Rubenstein. They had a certain kind of flavor to them, a certain level of budget. Romero was at a certain point in his life, but later on, when he got a little bit of money, he made Land of the Dead, right?
Yeah.
And he filmed that in Toronto, so he came up here. And he left his wife, his longtime wife Christine, for a woman named Suzanne, who was the bartender at the hotel where he was shooting.
Oh, wow.
And so he said, fuck it, I'm moving up here. So when he moved up to Toronto...
Jeez.
Yeah, so suddenly Romero and I became really good friends. He lived really close to me. And I would go on he shot Diary of the Dead up there, Survival of the Dead, Bruiser.
Do you think those movies that he shot up there, though, are like kind of like a different...
Yeah, I'm not going to... People slam them, but they don't... I'm not... because I knew George and I would go for sushi like once a month. I'd go over, we'd just drink scotch and watch Turner Classic Movies, and we'd just talk about movies. Not just horror movies, but then when he got enough in the cups, he'd just tell stories about the make. And he was always really despondent that people were rejecting these newer pictures he was making. He's like, Dawn of the Dead, now everybody wants me to make fucking Dawn of the Dead. He think about George, he's the same as John Carpenter. They loved movies. They were always trying to make other kinds of movies. They were slave to their expectations, and they could only get their budgets based on, you got to put zombies in it, George. So if you look at all the Dead movies, they're war movies, they're westerns. They're weird, bumbling slapstick comedies. They're all kinds of things that he was trying to do, but he had to insert the ghouls in there somewhere.
Yeah, that's actually, I think, why I love Prince of Darkness so much for Carpenter, is because that and I think They Live were the 2 movies that he made, and they had pre-sold those. So he already knew that he had was in the green, so he could kind of just do whatever he wanted.
Right, yeah.
So he was not a slave necessarily to his previous endeavors. But I wonder, it's these, because I think of Night, Dawn, and Day is like kind of a perfect trilogy. And I
Yeah.
would say it's a trilogy, but you're right. Like there are all these other movies and it's almost like a different chapter.
It were
like the Toronto
different chapters
chapter.
of his life. Yeah, different Toronto chapter. Also, they're a little more, if you watch them, they're a little bit more melancholy.
Mm-hmm.
I think Land of the Dead is a bit of a failure because there's studio money involved. There are too many
Yeah.
chefs in the kitchen. It wasn't long enough to develop the world that he was developing.
Mm-hmm.
And it was too short. I mean, it's neither, it
Here
doesn't,
nor there, yeah.
It doesn't quite work.
But it
there's
doesn't
great stuff
always-
in it, but it's also too expensive.
But also, like, it doesn't always work. Like, not every piece of art has to work.
No,
you can
but
try
with-
and you can miss.
No, but with George, I mean, if you go back to Night, he was by necessity being the mother of invention. He was almost like a DJ. Music and Night of the Living Dead's all found music. It's all drop needle stuff.
Yeah.
And it gives it this kind of like the music wasn't made for this movie, but he's found ways to edit with this existing music, and there's such a weird symbiosis there that doesn't quite work, but it works. This power, and he does it with Dawn as well. And to a lesser, he didn't really do it with Day, but he had a great score by John Harrison, really cool score for that, which elevated it. But by the time he gets to Land of the Dead, he's working on a studio level with big composers, and that personality, that independent spirit. George's hero was Orson Welles. And,
Yeah.
so there was that kind of love of cinema and rolling up your sleeves and getting your hands dirty was kind of gone. So I appreciate the next two he made, which were lower budget, Diary of the Dead and Survival, because they were lower budget and he had full control. No one was bugging him. So no, love them or hate them, they are uniquely George at this period in his life.
How old were your children when you showed them?
Well, I mean, George was a friend, so they would go sleep at his house.
They grew up around
but
it.
they didn't give a shit. I mean,
just like Uncle
I was
George.
afraid. I would always say to them, I'm not showing you Dawn of the Dead until you're like 15, because I was too young to see. It really fucked me up. Totally forgetting the world they live in now with video games and everything else. And what do you see on The Walking Dead?
Oh my God,
would have been X-rated when I was a
The
kid.
Walking Dead, I had to stop watching it at a certain
depressing.
point. I started getting really, really bad nightmares.
I just got
and
depressed.
It wasn't fun. Like
No, it's not
I like to
fun.
watch TV to have fun, and it's funny though because there are certain things that like my dad showed me when I was a kid that I think that nowadays parents would be like, you should not show your children. Like for example, Fantastic Planet, La Planète Sauvage. I watched that as a kid. It's
Yeah.
like one of my very first movie memories. Or like Baron Munchausen. Like my dad was showing me some weird stuff like that. And I think nowadays people would be like, oh, that's not correct to show a child because of like what it's rated. But like I'm fine.
Yeah.
And like now we have all these. You are right. Like kids now have all these really
Oh,
weird.
and they have YouTube. We don't know what they're doing.
Oh my God.
God, I mean, God knows what's out there. It's the Wild West, right?
Okay, and also like child YouTube and child TikTok, that's the scariest place.
Yeah.
I'm like whenever I'm at the airport and like I see a family and they just handed a kid like an iPad or a phone,
Right.
I always just like look at like what the kid is watching and I'm like, that's the child safe version of
Well, it's
YouTube or
like-
TikTok. Like that is not child safe. I would not watch that.
It's like when the production code hit in the early 30s, right? It's like suddenly you couldn't do this, you couldn't do that, but they still wanted to, tell their tales of sex and violence and weird shit. So they would kind of circumnavigate their limitations, and they would sneak in the dirty stuff as the subtext. Then it was still all there. You just had to look a little harder. So I think a lot of this stuff that's supposed to be kid friendly. Yeah, right. It's mutated and weird, and to me, it's like I don't know. You can show your kids almost anything within reason as long as you're prepared to sit with them and guide them
And explain to them.
Explain it to them, because kids aren't stupid. We weren't stupid when
No.
we were kids. Something happens to grown-ups when they at a certain level they start to think kids are like this alien dumb species. They're not. They're questing. They're evolving humans, and it's
Yeah.
up to you to guide them in their evolution. Are we almost out of time? I think we.
Oh, no, just
oh,
keep
we're
going.
not, because I
We're-
have a great.
Oh, yeah, tell me.
Back to that trilogy, and also the draconian Ontario censor board. So when I was coming of age and started collecting VHS, and this is about age 12, 13, I would go to mom and pop video stores, and you had the big box stuff, and they wanted to get rid of that shit because it was taking up all the space. So I could buy Umberto Lenzi's Nightmare City. It was called City of the Walking Dead then, and Tombs of the Blind Dead, and crazy ass European shit for really cheap because they just want to dump it in those giant sexy boxes and everything else. So I was like, and so I would do that. I'd make deals with these guys. I was a little hustler. It was great, and I always had my eye on like, okay, if this movie's bumping around a long time, I'd always tell the guy like, look, once this thing's rented out, you don't have any use for it. I'll pay you $20 or whatever.
Yeah.
And that was a lot for me back then, $20. I had to mow a lot of lawns to get that. But Day of the Dead, they had Day of the Dead there, and I rented it first. Now, when Day of the Dead came here in 1986 on VHS, the Ontario cut is literally cut to shit.
Oh, really?
Not even a graceful edit. They took this, and Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 was another one.
They just like
20 minutes gone. So like,
Wow,
there
no.
was not a drop of blood in it. Even the profanity, everything
What?
is cut to. Oh my God!
How?
It is. They would just go in there, cut, with whatever, like scissors. I mean, it was, and then stitch it back together. So the music would jump and
no.
Oh, it's gone. None of that stuff I'd heard about in Fangoria was there. This great unrated
You're
movie.
like, what is this?
I still liked it because I love Bub. You know, I love that Howard Sherman as Bub. So there was cool stuff in it, but I was like, this movie's bone-ass dry, man. What's going on?
You knew it was the censored version or
Well,
no?
yeah, because what happened is on the back of the box, they would have a sticker that they would just clumsily stick over the running time.
Oh.
And same thing with Texas Chainsaw Massacre, too. I remember seeing a bootleg of that off cable, off HBO or something, and it was disgustingly violent. And then I bought the Ontario version of it, a sticker on the back. There's nothing there, man. It was empty. It was bone-ass dry. So here's the thing. So we didn't have Blockbuster Video. We didn't have all this stuff. And then when I was, years later, I bought this version of Day of the Dead. Still loved it, but I knew what I had. Always on the lookout for the unrated. Couldn't find it anywhere. Anyways. So years later, I think I was 17 or 18. And a Blockbuster Video starts to creep into Canada now. And one opens up close to where we live in this little suburb outside of Toronto. And I start looking in the horror section. To me, it was like, because I was used to these mom and that had the weird shit.
The weird stuff,
the Paragon videos, all that cool stuff that we love now was all the down market ghetto stuff. And that's what I liked. Sometimes I'd rent the same movie 4 times because they'd put a different title on it. I didn't care. It was all part of the come on. The P.T. Barnum circus. Yeah. So I was looking through the horror section. There's Day of the Dead. I'm like, oh, Day of the Dead. I pick it up, turn it over. It's the real running time.
Wow, this is the first time a Blockbuster has ever come in clutch.
Yeah, so, I mean, it was released unrated in the States, so I don't think there was a big issue about that, ever, theatrically or on video. And so what this Blockbuster must have done is just exported all their
American stock to Canada.
Thinking, because, early days of home video, everyone's asleep at the wheel, right? So I'm like, oh, my God, could this be? Could this be? And I rented it, took it home with my buddy, my girlfriend at the time. We got together and I gave them a little pre-lecture of, this movie, blah, 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 blah. Even back then I was obnoxiously know-it-all when it came to movies. And then we popped it up. And immediately when Dr. Tongue shows up on screen, in the Ontario version, they blacked him out. So he's just sitting there and it says Day of the Dead. You can't see anything on his face. All of a sudden there's his tongue and it's hanging out of his mouth and it's falling off. I'm like, oh my God.
You knew what you were in
angels
for.
were singing. It was like, oh my God, this is it. This is it. So we're watching it, and then if you've seen Day of the Dead, you know it's love it or hate it, it's an embarrassment of violence.
I love it.
I mean, even the guts falling out, the heads drill. I mean, it's just, and then that climax, where they rip the head off and his vocal cords are straight.
That's one of the best moments ever.
Oh my God! Oh, we're done.
We're done.
Okay, quick. Can we?
Finish this.
So, anyways, I was like, it was a religious experience here. I got this finally uncut copy of The Day of the Dead, but it's not mine. What do I do with it? And Blockbuster Video is not keen to making deals. So, fuck it. I took my shitty copy of Day of the Dead, switched the labels, put it all in there, and I returned my shit-ass copy of Day of the Dead to Blockbuster, and I kept this. And now, to this day, I wonder how many poor schlubs like me ended up at that Blockbuster, saw that running time, got excited, took it home, and they were like, sad trombone. So that's my Day of the Dead story. It's a good one. And I still have that stolen Day of the Dead.
So if anyone was in that area and experienced that, you know who to blame.
I mean, knowing that area, I was probably the only man who gave it a rat's ass or knew anything. But you never know. So yes, I don't break the law often, but when I do, it's with very good reason.
It's for art.
Yes.
And that's all the time that we have for today. Chris, is there any final thought that you would like to leave the audience with?
Oh my God, no. Just that this is a great experience. I love you. I love this show. I love everything that you guys are up to and doing. And it's for someone who's loved this stuff since I have a memory. It's just a joy. Just pure pleasure. And there's few things in life that give me absolutely pure, uncomplicated pleasure. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. And thanks for being a listener. I really appreciate it. And also thank you to your son, for your son listening as well.
Well, yeah. So, Jack. Hey, Jack.
Jack, thanks for listening. That is it for today. Thank you so much to Chris for coming on to the show. You can keep up with the latest news from Chris on his website, chrisalexanderonline.com, or on his Instagram at Chris_Alexander_films. I'm Gala Avery, and this has been The Gala Show.